When Albert Fish was first caught and brought to the police station, there were people that thought maybe this was the man Frank Howard that had been responsible for the disappearance of so many children, and many thought there's no possible way a little old man could have done these things. But when the world starts to hear of what Albert Fish has done for most of his life, the world had not seen crimes like this or really heard of them. There was no ghost stories, there was no fictional movies, there was no stories, even from war, about what Albert was confessing to. He was something new to the world in crime, and essentially is the grandfather of psychopathic behavior from a serial killer. Even so much that modern day serial killers want nothing to do with Albert. Albert's execution didn't seem to bother him, but what would be unraveled with Albert from the moment of confession to sitting down in that hard wooden chair that would take his life in Sing Sing prison would be layered with many different stories from Albert. The moment the world learned of Albert Fish is the moment they put him to a quick death. In 1934, December of that year, when Albert is taken to the police station after being caught from a letter that he sent to the Budd residence explaining how he took their child and what he did in an appalling detail to their little girl. The letter is traced back to a residence where Albert was living. He's met by detectives. He even pulls out a razor, trying to defend himself. But Albert now, from time taking its toll, he is now the little old man that stands before them. Throughout the years before Albert is caught, letters had been showing up to parents' homes that now had missing children that were last seen with a little gray man with a large mustache, who the neighborhood kids were now calling the boogeyman. Now that police have Albert in their midst, they believe Albert to be Frank Howard. But soon enough, whether Albert was tired or just eager to talk to someone about what he had been up to for decades, Albert goes into horrifying detail about who and what he is to society. And from Grace Budd to Little Billy goes into horrifying detail. Not only did he kill them, but what he did to the bodies. It's a pivotal moment in recorded American crime history. No one had ever admitted to eating children before. As Albert is being interviewed and talking slowly about his dealings, whispers make their way out of the small room he's being held in by detectives that a man is confessing to eating children. Reporters are tipped off and rushed to the police station looking for the man named Albert, who was the boogeyman they've been looking for quite some time. Albert's story is not just only unique to him, but it's really the first big moment for serial killers being found. The word serial killer wasn't even a term till decades later, after Albert was long gone. No one knew what Albert was. Nothing like this had even been written in Hollywood or horror stories. Nothing on this level would come up again until 1957, when Ed Gein was caught and really set the stage up for what could be this ancient form of humans that were living among us, especially splintering off into Hollywood and becoming big business. Albert wasn't new to the world of people killing for pleasure and eating them. He was just the first one that was brought to light, right in the middle of the industrial complex taking over, and history of all types being recorded. Even Albert would say he was just one of many, that his kind know how to find one another. There's a detailed element to Albert that we still see in serial killers even today. One big element, it's blending into their community and being the unassuming in the crowd. The other big element that we've seen as recent was in the Gilgo Beach murders from Rex Huberman. It's the taunting of the family that lost their loved one. Albert enjoyed the cruelty of sending letters to the victim's family, essentially the parents of the children he ate. He would go into great detail of stomach-turning moments of cutting the flesh off the bone and cooking the meat, and then right down to him biting into the flesh as his teeth chewed up the child. Many serial killers throughout the past had their favorite moments of the murder. Some it's in the beginning, strangulation, the actual act of assault. Albert's was all of it and above. He loved before the murder and after the murder. One of the most famous crime stories is the meal that Albert had with the Budd family, where Albert had planned to take the Budd son and eat his genitalia, but his attraction was drawn to someone else, the little daughter of the family, Grace Budd, just 10 years old, unaware of the man whose knees she was sitting on, wanted to cook her. Albert was so polite and timid that he saw the naive parents and knew if they believed the first story he came up with to get into their home, they would believe the next story as well. And why would they think that anyone, let alone a little old man, would want to take their daughter and eat her? But that's just what Albert did eventually. He came back and took Grace right from the parents' hands, saying, "I'm going to take her to my niece's birthday party." But just hours later, Albert would be chopping her up and cooking her and eating her. When Albert entered the prison system, you could easily say he was one of the first big criminals to be accused of what he had done. The papers loved him, and even the police. They pushed the story. He was an overnight sensation. When Albert Fish was arrested in 1934, he wanted to talk about the murders he had done. You see, Albert never really stopped killing. He had more or less just waited for opportunities that came to him. He was a little old man. Albert murdered people when he was young too. He talked about it, but the ones he was known for happened when he was an old man, which is why children named him the Little Gray Man when he walked off with one of their friends. Albert was quoted as saying, he no longer desired his life. He didn't care anymore. It's not that Albert was disgusted with his life. He was just old. He was tired. He didn't care anymore. Albert wasn't scared of death nor pain. He was just ready to die. Albert held nothing back in the confessions. He confessed to murders that only he could give details to where detectives could confirm it was him, like the murder of Francis McDonald, age 8. Albert took him in 1924. His murder was never solved until Albert just talked about it, giving details. He told detectives what he did to the boy. He told them that he beat the boy to death. He wanted him to feel pain as he watched the boy die. Albert was also aroused when inflicting pain on himself as well. From the time Albert was arrested to the time of his death, it was unlike anything today. The process in which it moved, it was extremely fast. On March 11th, 1935, Albert's trial starts. His lawyers claim that he's legally insane. The problem though with that is that Albert looked and sounded just like a little old man, like a grandpa. No one believed that Albert was eating children. So to prove this, Albert kept talking. He told detectives where to go look, where they might find some of Grace Budd and the tools that he used on her. Albert told the story of Grace Budd and how he took her to an abandoned home while he had her wait outside, while he prepared for her inside the home. Grace, for the last few moments of her life, picked little flowers in the yard, the same flowers that fill the yard of the home today that have been there for generations. It's hard to say what Grace was thinking in those moments. Did she find it odd that she was with a little old man that she really didn't even know? She was supposed to be at a birthday party with other little children, but she was at a rundown home in the woods with no one around, far from her parents. Even if she decided to run away, she couldn't have gone far. Albert would soon yell out the window for Grace to come join him inside. When she walked in, she brought her flowers with her to show Albert. But when she turned the corner, she saw Albert naked, staring at her. Grace started to cry, yelling and screaming for her parents. Albert watched her for a moment as she stood in horror of knowing that something terrible was happening. More than not in that moment, she knew her life was over. Albert ran to her, jumping on her and strangling her to death. Once Grace was gone, Albert took her body apart and cooked it. The only reason Albert could be linked to Grace was because her parents invited Albert into their home, and they saw him walk away with Grace to never seeing their daughter again alive. When Albert went to trial on March 11th, 1935 in White Plains, New York, 2 of Albert's biological children were there to support him. They even met with the Budd family, giving their sympathy and saying that they were sorry. Albert's biological children would testify on behalf of their father, telling the courts that he was a good man and had always been a good father that provided for them. but the court also wanted to know, had they ever seen any of these behaviors that Albert had talked about? The only thing Albert's biological children would say is that Albert was very religious and kept a strict household, being an only parent. But this would later be put to the test when Albert's stepdaughter was asked to sit down and spill the soup of what life was like growing up with Albert. She said that Albert had a game that they all played together, all the children in the house. The first step is that Albert would go take off his clothes and put a pair of shorts on, and then come back to the children and start the game. The rule of the game was simple. A child would sit on Albert's back, and Albert would have to guess how many fingers that child was holding up. When Albert was wrong, more than not most of the time, even willingly, he would be whipped on the back with a painting stick. All of the children would take turns. She also told the stories of Albert whipping himself on the back with his leather belt until he bled and screamed. She also talked about Albert's strong religious beliefs, praying and reading their Bibles. Also, at Albert's trial, an x-ray was shown of Albert's pelvis, introduced as evidence showing that Albert was insane and that no one was making up stories about Albert inflicting pain on himself. They showed the x-ray of more than 24 needles embedded deep in Albert's pelvis that he had put there himself, that had gone so deep he couldn't get them out. Albert's execution was set for January 16, 1936 for the murder of Grace, the only murder they could 100% link him to. Albert would sit in Sing Sing prison for a short time, but when it came to the last moments of his life, he was 65 years old. It sounds wild to say now, but even at that moment, reporters, therapists, detectives, no one really knew how to talk to Albert at that time. They just didn't understand what he was. Psychology at that point really had no books, studies done, physicians to understand and write down the gravity of what Albert had done. When Albert was examined though, he spoke of elements in his life that were written down. Albert talked about his obsession with cannibalism, eating his own feces, burning himself with hot iron rods, and shoving needles into his groin, and leaving them there so they would always arouse him. Before Albert went to the electric chair, he would make a comment that was written down and find itself attached to his history. Albert would give the sentence, "It will be a supreme thrill, the only one I haven't tried," talking about the electric chair. Make no mistake about it, Albert was evil, he was deranged, he was everything and then some more. Most serial killers probably wouldn't even want to be left alone with him and would find him revolting. Albert's execution was set for January 16th, 1936, at the age of 65. The day of Albert's execution moved fast. Albert entered the execution chamber just a little bit after 11 p.m. and was immediately sat down into the electric chair and strapped down. It was said that everything happened extremely fast. Albert's last words when he was asked if he had any, he said, "I don't even know why I'm here." There's many stories, many legends that came out of Albert's execution, but really, none of them were true. Albert died the same way many others had died in the electric chair, before and after. After 2 jolts, Albert was pronounced dead and was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery that you can still find today and stand on Albert's grave. Much of Albert's story is still unknown, and it's only the little tidbits of information that Albert told us, and speculation more than not. There's not a real known number of victims that can be tracked down. We just know that Albert lived a cruel and hateful life against people, some of the most innocent. His crimes were beyond barbaric and Satanist, and elements from the pits of hell. But if anything is true about Albert's story, it's that we'll still be talking about it 100 years from now. The story of Albert Fish.